very bad.
Boker Tov to everyone.
לרפואת עדן בת הילה, אדם בן חווה.
Okay, so we're going to discuss something here that in this week's Parsha that has tremendous ramifications, not just on ourselves, but you'll see how far-reaching it is and how far it actually goes. So let me just start off with the beginning of this week's Parsha, Parashat Bshlach. It says the following: "Vayi Bshlach Paro et ha'am, ve'lo nacha Elohim derech eretz Pelishtim, ki karov hu, ki amar Elohim pen yinachem ha'am bir'otam milchama ve'shavu Mitzrayma." So Hashem does something very interesting. He makes Paro. First question is, why is it saying Vayi Bshlach Paro? Really, it should say that God directed them, but it just wanted to reinforce that no, Paro is the one who wanted to send them out. It was a decision he made, he wanted to send them out. So the Pasuk tells us that the way that God wanted to take him in a roundabout path. So, for example, I'm not too strong geographically, but I know Eretz Israel, for example, is like over here. Where's Egypt? Egypt is going to be on the west side, right? Egypt is on the west side of Eretz Israel. So Eretz Israel is here and Egypt is here. So what did Hashem do? He didn't take them from here to here. That's not what he did. What did God do? Exactly as you did. He took them south. Then after he took them south, he took them all the way north. And then from going north, he took them going down a little diagonally towards southeast. Eretz Israel is right here. Egypt is right here. Why not just cross this way? So God did not think it was appropriate. So Hashem says, why? Maybe they're going to see there's going to be, as they're traveling, a war will begin, and they're going to want to run back to Mitzrayim. That's what the Pasuk is telling us. And then it continues and it says, so he goes, takes them south, north, and back to Eretz Israel. Then it gives us the locations in which they parked, they settled, and then comes a very famous part of the story that everyone's aware of, but I'm not going to talk about the miracle, I want to talk about actually what happened before the miracle. So the Torah tells us Paro decides to take his men. Now Paro decided to take not just his men, but his most elite unit of warriors. He says, let's go and get the Jews back. Just as a fun fact, Paro, quote unquote, you guys remember the Emancipation Declaration, the Declaration of Emancipation, right? With Abraham Lincoln, how he's into slavery, that there should be no more slaves, etc. Meaning Paro let him go. They're already free people completely. At this point, there's a form of international law. They're no longer your slaves. You let them go. But he decided otherwise. He decided to go, take them, and chase them and try to bring them back. So the Torah tells us he took roughly 600 rechev, and in Pasuk is Veshelishim. There were 3 on 600 rechev, so not more than 1,800 soldiers. How many Jews were there? 600,000. There were 600,000. So you have 1,800 soldiers chasing 600,000 Jews, men, those that can fight, at the very least. Who is here has favorable odds? 600,000 or 1,800 soldiers? Which begs the question, as one of the commentators writes, he says the Ibn Ezra, why not fight? Because now they're coming, they're traveling the Midbar, they're getting to the Yam Suf, and the Pasuk tells us that Bnei Israel, they were screaming, right? They were screaming, they were scared, they're about to fight them. What do? They want to take us, they want to kill us. You guys are 600,000, they're 1,800. So it's very hard to understand how they didn't do anything. They were so concerned, so scared. From what? The numbers are highly in your favor. And then they tell Moshe, I think this is the first source for sarcasm in the Torah. Even through all the anxiety that they experienced, I want to tell you how they answered to Moshe when they saw all the Egyptians. about to catch up to them. They say, ויאמרו אל משה, המבלי אין קברים במצרים, לקחתנו למות במדבר, מה זאת עשית לנו להוציאנו ממצרים? They said to him, Moshe, we don't understand. There isn't a large enough cemetery in Mitzrayim. You have to bring us here to bury us here. So in the midst of anxiety, in the midst of being very fearful, they bring out this sarcastic statement to Moshe. I think that's the first source for sarcasm in the Torah. And then Moshe tells them, don't worry, Hashem is going to be with you, etc. So I just want to focus on three main questions. First question is, why did Hashem take him in a roundabout manner? Take him direct, that's the first question. Second question is, why not fight? You guys are 600,000. Why not fight for your life and for your children's life? Okay, you can fight for your life. I know you can fight for your children's life. Do that, at the very least. They were not able to fight. And lastly, God did so many miracles for them. So many miracles for them. Okay, they couldn't fight, so with all the miracles you did that defy nature, make them warriors. Put, courage in their hearts, turn them into brave warriors, let them go out and fight. I mean, you did all these miracles, so just do one more. What's the problem? So I think this is such an important thing, and it has so much truth until this type of level of truth reverberates throughout all of centuries. You see, the Ibn Ezra is one of the commentators, and he says, and he also, this is brought down by Maimonides, the Rambam. Just as a fun fact here, the Rambam did not write a commentary on the Torah. Many people did, but he did not. And he gave a reason as to why he didn't write a commentary on the Torah. The reason he didn't do it, he wrote to his son, is because of the commentator, the Ibn Ezra, which I just quoted. He said, he read his commentary, he said, I don't need to do it, he did the work. Which means Maimonides relied on his commentary so heavily, it was so accurate according to how he saw it. Now remember, the Rambam, almost all the halachot that we do today, in Shulchan Aruch, 80-90% of it comes is Rambam. Almost everything we do, philosophically, there's so many things that Rambam has just influenced our life as a whole. One of the most influential rabbis, we have Mi Moshe, Ad Moshe Lo Kam Ke Moshe. That's in reference to Rambam. So he was transformative in everything that he did, but he did not write a commentary on the Torah. He writes to his son in his will, he tells the son the following: learn the commentary of the Ibn Ezra. Why? I was very surprised by the reason. I thought, maybe because he sat down, he learned a lot. The reason he gave, if Rambam would not write it, I wouldn't believe it. The Ibn Ezra didn't have a lot of luck, unfortunately. He struggled with Parnasah. So he was a traveler. He wandered from place to place to place. He had such bad luck that he said that if any business he went into, it did not go well for him at all. And he said that even if he went to the business of tachrichim is what we use to, when someone passes away, to cover the body, he said people would stop dying. That's how bad his luck was. That's what the Ibn Ezra writes. That's how bad his luck was. Now, why did he travel from place to place? Because of poverty. But he also gained something else that many people did not gain. He was able to live and be part of many different types of cultures. He saw different communities. He saw different geographical locations. That broadened his mind, his perspective. So when he came to give commentary on Torah, his commentary wasn't narrow commentary as to where he is. It was a lot more broad because he experienced and saw many different things. Now you have a good reason to travel in the world if you wanted to. You can tell your husband, this broadens the mind, it's very good. So when he traveled, went everywhere. So he writes the following: do you know why the Jews did not fight? Very simple. Slave mentality. They were slaves. And who were their masters? The Egyptians. And now what is the definition of a slave? no backbone. I don't have the ability to take on a challenge. I can't face the challenge. I'm being told what to do and I do it. That's what a slave is. They had no courage, no capability. They saw themselves as worthless people, unfortunately, because that's what they were trained to do. It's a very famous analogy that's used for this often. Because this is a very classic commentary on this, but that's not the focus of this. You'll see where I want to get to. If you take a small elephant and you tie him against a pole, and he tries to break free, he's going to struggle. And he's on there for a year, 2 years, 5 years, but then he grows and he becomes very bigger. He's much bigger he becomes. At one point, he gives up trying to break free because he realizes, I can't do it. Little does he know that if he actually tried, at his size, he would wank it apart and he would just go free. That's the mentality that the Jews had. There were 600,000, that's true, but they didn't have the capability to fight, especially because the Egyptians were the masters. Now I want to tell you how far-reaching this is. The Torah tells us later on in Parashat Bshlach, the sin of the spies. If you guys remember the sin of the spies, Moshe sends out spies to go check out the land, and with the exception of 2 spies, all the other ones bring a bad report. And then they got heavily punished. What was their punishment? That not only are they going to not go into Eretz Israel, they're actually going through the Midbar is going to be their punishment, because as we said, they went south, north, and then into Eretz Israel. So that was a 40-year journey, and it was a very difficult journey. Yes, and by the way, Hashem gives us credit for going through this journey. That we were with him in the Midbar. This is one of the things that if we want to Hashem to find a servant, we remind him that we went with you into the Midbar without food, drink, water. That's something that, we have credit by him. Until this day, we remind Hashem of this. But ultimately, the Jews, the punishment was, you're going to go through the Midbar and you can't go in. So what's interesting is, there was that generation. The punishment of that generation was, all the men were actually going to die. All that men. A lot of the women actually did not participate. And so actually they had the merit to go inside, right? So that's one of the things that why men specifically were the ones who were actually going to die. But what's so amazing is Hashem tells them, Moshe tells the people through Moshe, he says, "V'nasau et zenutechem atom pigrechem." What does that mean? He tells them the following: the generation that sinned, right? They're obviously going to die. But the children now, themselves, the children of that generation, also have to go through the desert. For them, that's not a punishment. For them, that's going to be a salvation, because they're going to go into Eretz Yisrael. But they still have to experience the difficulty of going through the Midbar. Why? Poked avot al banim. We have a rule that a lot of times when parents sin, and if the children oftentimes go in that route, they will also have to experience some of the punishment or some of the difficulty. That's the reality. So the Moshe Rabbeinu is telling him, what does that mean? When it says the pasuk, "V'naseu et zenutechem," what does that mean? The children are going to carry the defect of the parents. What do I mean, the defect of the parents? The defect of the parents was in how they reacted during the sin of the spies, and during the whole time they were in the Midbar. Because when they left Mitzrayim, it was only a period of about, from Mitzrayim to Kiryat Yam Suf was about 6 days. And then the sin of the spies was a year later. So 2 years after Mitzrayim was the sin of the spies. So all the sins that you read in the Torah in Bamidbar are the first 2 years after leaving Mitzrayim. 38 years after was pretty much a time of peace. There weren't as many issues and problems. The first 2 years were filled with issues. So all these 2 years that were filled with all the sins came through the fact that their parents did not behave appropriately the whole time frame. So comes out an incredible thing here. even though the children also had to suffer, but their journey, that was their salvation. Now why? Why do they need to go through this? Because this actually ties in beautifully with the last question that we asked. We says, why did Hashem not make them into warriors? The reason Hashem had to take their children and make them experience this difficulty is because their parents had slave mentality. Now, you're going to go into Eretz Israel, you're going to have to build a community, you're going to have to build a country. What type of mentality do you need to have? A fighting mentality. If the children are going to grow up in Bamidbar, they're going to grow up with a lot of challenges and difficulties. Not slave mentality, but a lot of challenges, difficulty. And there were wars in the Midbar. So the purpose of taking the children of the Midbar was to build them and make them into warriors. So they can go out and battle. So their psychology is very different than their parents' psychology. And therefore, the reason why, this is why they had to go through all this. This was their salvation. It had to build them up to make them into warriors, because they had to fight Amalek and they had to go into Eretz Israel and all these things. So their whole reality was very different than their parents, although their parents unfortunately affected their children. Very much so. So you see here, and this is where Maimonides comes in nicely. He says, you know why God didn't do the miracle of turning them into warriors? How come he didn't take the parents? Just make them into brave warriors. What's the problem? We have a rule. When it comes to nature, God can do many different types of miracles. When it comes to man, Hashem does not get involved. It's all in our hands. Therefore, we have reward and punishment. When it comes to making a choice, God is not going to go in and change a person from a slave into a warrior. That's only on us. That's not on Hashem. And that's why he had to build him. He had to take him through the journey. Which comes out a very important thing here.
So personal growth.
Huh? Personal growth, absolutely. Comes out a very important thing here. You know, what application does it have to us? As parents, even when we grew up, you know, I have 3 of my own, thank God. And people grow up in a specific way. And the way we grow up affects our psychology, our mindset, how we approach things. And a lot of times, we know our shortcomings, we know our flaws. And oftentimes, we want to fix them, we know it's a problem, but we struggle. We struggle a lot with it. But one thing we should really focus on is not transmitting and giving over that struggle that we have psychologically to our children. If we suffer from a form of anxiety, if we have fears, maybe some depression, whatever it is that we struggle with, we have to be very, very careful not to give it over to our children. It's a very difficult thing to do. There's a story of a rabbi, his name is Rav Noach Weinberg. And you guys know Aish? Aish, right? The old Shorashim, there's a place called Aish. He's the founder of Aish. There's Aish all over the world. If you go to Yerushalayim, there's Aish in front of the Kotel. Very, very, very smart man. He's a revolutionary rabbi in many ways in our time. And I wrote in his book something I never forgot till this day. He said when his son was young, he saw him climb up, get on a chair, get on the counter, and then maybe he put the chair on the counter because there was cookies all the way on top. Most parents do, either they would scream, "What are you doing?" and rush to the kid. And there's also danger in that because the kid can be startled and can fall, God forbid. Or "Get down, don't do this, it's dangerous," etc. You know what he did? He struggled. He realized he struggled to get the cookie. He went over there and he gave him a hand to get to the cookie. And he explained the reason why he did that is because he wanted to train his son that if you want something, go and get it. I'm here to help you. It's a whole different perspective. He wasn't worried. Yes, it was dangerous. And there's a time in which you can come to him and he can communicate and let him know it's not the best way to get the cookie because there's danger involved. But ultimately, he wanted to, first and foremost, he wanted to improve and work on there's a goal, that's something that you want, go after it, seek it. I'm here to help you, I'm here to support you. So everything that we have is from one generation to another. So we also have to be, things can be very true. And while things can be very true to us, may not be very true to our children. They have different realities than we do. They live in different time frames than we do. And we also have to try to internalize and understand. And therefore, you see here that the psychology of the parents in Mitzrayim affected their children. So when even when we were Mitzrayim as slaves, Mitzrayim Mamash being as slaves, that slave mentality carried over to the kids. And so much so that even those that were the younger generation in the Midbar, they themselves needed to rid themselves of such mentality of growing with their parents. It wasn't as bad as it was in Mitzrayim, but they had to go through a process to cleanse themselves of that psychology, because this type of psychology can really, instead of growing and developing the person, the opposite is true. It can destroy him, it can bring him down or her down. So we have to be very, very careful in what we give over to our children when it comes to fears and anxiety. Which leads me to a few of the concluding points. On this commentary that the Ibn Ezra gave, which he said that, well, the Jews could not fight, he points to a different pasuk. So I went over and I looked at a different pasuk, and I thought it was an incredible pasuk. He takes us to pasuk, to Perek Bet in Shmot, pasuk Gimel, where it discusses Yocheved, the mother of Moshe, where she took the basket and she put Moshe inside. And somehow he goes into the storyline, and he says the following: how is Moshe different than everybody else? He says, Ulai, he says, maybe we can say the following. All the Jews were slaves at the time. Their mentality, even though the tribe of Levi were not slaves. The tribe of Levi were sitting down and learning. They were not slaves. It was known. It was the only tribe who were not slaves, but they were still very much affected by what was going on. So, look what Hashem did, he explains. He made Yocheved take Moshe, put him in the basket. And who finds him? Bitya bat Paro. The Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, for him to succeed in his mission, he had to grow up differently than the Jewish people. He could not have that same slave mentality psychology. One of the reasons, other than the fact that it's slave mentality, is that he won't have the courage to fight off anything and everything, is also because if you are part of the Jewish people, if you were slaves with them, then they see you like them. And if they see you like them, it's hard for them to accept you as a leader. Leaders are typically people who we accept who are not so much as similar to us. And therefore, he explains that Moshe Rabbeinu had to be separate from the Jewish people. And then he says, look at Moshe Rabbeinu's life. He grew up in the house of kings. In fact, the Midrash tells us that Paro sent him to a school of kings so he can learn how to be a leader. He made him the head of his household. But at the same time, he also had the courage to kill the Egyptian who hit the Jew. And he also, if you remember, when he fled Mitzrayim, because they wanted to kill him after he killed the Egyptian, what did he do? He sees the daughters of Yitro surrounding by the well, and they're being bullied. He comes in and saves them. If he had a slave mentality, he would not have the ability to do that. So the Ibn Ezra explains that Moshe Rabbeinu had to grow up in a whole different culture and a whole different reality in relation to the Jewish people. You see the effects of what that turned him into. Therefore, that even if we personally had our struggles as we grow up, we have to be extremely, extremely careful with how we give it over to our children and to ourselves. And that goes for husbands, wives, even older siblings can very much affect younger ones. This is how far-reaching this goes until very much this day. The Jews, like everyone else, suffered. They had their issues. They struggled themselves. But ultimately, this is where Hashem cannot get involved in our psychological battles. He's not going to go in and change it. It's up to us to do that. And there's a way to do it. We don't have time to go into it, but this is just a little bit of the parasha that I wanted to give over and kind of see the challenges that they themselves had, we ourselves also had. But we again have to be very careful in knowing what to transmit and not to transmit to our children. Any questions?